The slap echoed like a gunshot, sharp and ugly, slicing through the chatter of the crowded street. Martha Jones, 78, stood frozen, her cheeks stinging, her eyes locked on the man who just struck her, a man who didn't yet know he'd unraveled his own world. Around them, the world held its breath, phones raised, voices rising, as the weight of what just happened sank into the bones of everyone watching. It was a humid afternoon in Bronzeville, Chicago, the kind where the air clung to your skin like a second shirt. Martha, with her silver braids tucked neatly under a faded blue headscarf, had walked into Sam Carver's corner store like she did every week for 30 years. Sam, a wiry 45-year-old with a permanent scowl, ran the place like a king guarding his castle. The store, with its chipped paint and flickering fluorescent lights, was a neighborhood staple, but Sam's temper was as much a fixture as the shelves of canned goods. Martha, always polite, always patient, asked for her usual loaf of bread and a tin of coffee. But today, Sam's patience was thinner than the threadbare rug by the counter. "You're short $1, lady," Sam snapped, tossing her change back across the counter. His voice carried the kind of edge that made the other customers glance up nervously. Martha frowned, her hands steady as she recounted the bills. "I gave you a 10, Mr. Carver. Should be plenty." Sam's face reddened. "Don't play me, old woman. I know your type thinking you can scam me 'cause I'm busy." His words dripped with venom, and the accusation landed like a spark in dry grass. The store went quiet, save for the hum of the fridge in the corner. Martha's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "My type? You wanna explain that one?" The air thickened. A young cashier, barely 20, froze mid-scan, her hands hovering over a bag of chips. An older man in a trucker hat shifted uncomfortably near the door. Sam leaned forward, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. "You know exactly what I mean. Always coming in here, acting like you own the place." That's when it happened. Sam's hand shot out, a reckless swing that caught Martha's cheek with a sickening smack. She stumbled but didn't fall, her hand flying to her face as gasps rippled through the store. A teenage girl in the aisle dropped her soda, the can clattering to the floor. Outside, passers-by stopped, drawn by the commotion, their phones already recording. "Get out!" Sam bellowed, pointing at the door. "And don't come back." Martha straightened, her eyes blazing with something fiercer than pain. She didn't speak, didn't cry out. She just stared at Sam, her silence louder than his rage. Then, with the dignity of someone who'd faced worse storms, she turned and walked out, the bell above the door jingling faintly behind her. The street outside buzzed with outrage. A young man in a hoodie shouted, "You can't just hit her like that." A woman with a stroller shook her head, muttering, "That's Martha. She don't bother nobody." The crowd grew, their voices a rising tide of anger and disbelief. Sam, still fuming, stepped outside, ready to defend his turf. He didn't expect what came next. Martha stood across the street, her back straight, her eyes locked on the shop. She didn't need to raise her voice, her presence was enough. A man in a suit, carrying a leather briefcase, approached her, his face grim. He whispered something, and Martha nodded, her expression unreadable. The man, later identified as her lawyer, pulled out a stack of papers and walked toward Sam. "Mr. Carver," the lawyer said, his voice cutting through the crowd's murmurs, "I'm Daniel Harris, representing Martha Jones. You're standing on her property." Sam laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Her property? This is my store." Harris didn't flinch. He handed Sam a document, its edges worn but its words clear. "Ms. Jones owns this building, has since 1982. Your lease is month to month, and as of this moment, it's terminated." The crowd erupted, a mix of cheers and stunned whispers. Sam's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He snatched the papers, scanning them frantically, as if the words might change under his glare. They didn't. The deed was real, the signatures ironclad. Martha Jones, the woman he'd just struck, wasn't just a customer. She was his landlord, the owner of the entire block. Sam's mind raced back to the rumors he'd ignored when he signed the lease 5 years ago. The old-timers had whispered about a woman who'd bought up half the neighborhood in the 80s, back when property was dirt cheap and Bronzeville was struggling. They said she'd held on to it through recessions, riots, and gentrification, a quiet force no one crossed. Sam had laughed it off, thinking it was just talk. Now, that woman stood across the street, her gaze steady, her power undeniable. The crowd pressed closer, their phones still recording, their voices growing louder. "You messed up, man," someone shouted. Another voice chimed in, "That's what you get." Sam's hands shook as he clutched the papers, his world tilting. He'd built his life around this store, every late night, every argument with suppliers, every dollar scraped together to keep it afloat. And now, with one swing, he'd lost it all. Martha, still silent, turned to Harris and nodded. He pulled out his phone, dialed, and spoke briefly. Within minutes, a police car rolled up, its lights flashing. The officers stepped out, their faces stern as they approached Sam. "Sir, we need to talk about an assault reported at this location," one said, glancing at Martha. Sam's knees buckled. "Assault?" Two didn't mean, his voice cracked, but the officers weren't listening. They gestured for him to step aside, their hands resting lightly on their belts. The crowd's murmurs turned to a low roar, a mix of justice and fury. Martha didn't watch. She walked away, her steps slow but sure, her headscarf catching the late afternoon light. She didn't need to see Sam's downfall to know it was coming. She'd spent decades building something bigger than revenge, a legacy born from years of quiet resilience, of saving every penny, of outsmarting a world that tried to keep her small. This block, these buildings, were her proof, her defiance. Back in the store, the young cashier, Tasha, slipped out from behind the counter, her hands trembling. She'd seen everything, heard every word. She caught up to Martha down the street, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Jones, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he'd do that." Martha stopped, her eyes softening. "Child, you don't answer for his sins. You just keep your head up and do better." Tasha nodded, tears brimming, and Martha patted her shoulder before continuing on. By evening, the story was everywhere. Local news vans parked outside the shop, reporters interviewing anyone who'd talk. Social media exploded with clips of the slap, the lawyer's reveal, and Martha's quiet exit. Hashtags like "Justice for Martha" and "Bronzeville Strong" trended for days. But beneath the noise, something deeper stirred, a reckoning with the ugliness of prejudice, the power of truth, and the strength of a woman who'd spent a lifetime proving the world wrong. Sam sat alone in his store that night, the lights off, the papers still in his hands. He thought about his father, a man who taught him to stand his ground, no matter what. He thought about the customers he'd snapped at, the ones he'd dismissed, the ones he'd judged before they even spoke. And he thought about Martha, a woman he'd underestimated, a woman whose life was a testament to everything he'd never understood. The next morning, a sign went up on the shop's door, "Closed until further notice." Martha didn't need to post it herself. She didn't need to gloat. She'd already won, not with a slap or a shout, but with the quiet power of a life well lived. Across town, Martha sat in her modest apartment, sipping coffee from the tin she'd never gotten to buy. Her phone buzzed with messages, neighbors, friends, even strangers offering support. She didn't answer them. Instead, she pulled out a faded photo album, flipping to a picture of her younger self standing in front of the same building Sam thought was his. In the photo, she was smiling, her hands on her hips, the deed freshly signed. She'd been 35 then, a single mother with 2 jobs, scrapping for every dollar to buy a piece of a neighborhood others had given up on. Now, at 78, she was still that woman, just older, wiser, and unafraid. The world could throw its worst at her, but she'd built something it couldn't take away. And as the sun rose over Bronzeville, casting long shadows across her block, Martha Jones knew one thing for certain: she wasn't done building yet. Martha Jones didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the sting on her cheek or the chaos that had unfolded outside Sam Carver's shop, but because her mind was already moving forward. She'd learned long ago that dwelling on pain only gave it power. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, the same one she'd bought secondhand in 1975, and started planning. The block she owned wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a promise to her late husband, to her children, to the community that had raised her when the world seemed determined to break her. Sam's outburst was a crack in that promise, but Martha knew how to mend cracks. By morning, Bronzeville was still buzzing. The news had spread beyond the neighborhood, picked up by national outlets hungry for a story that mixed outrage and redemption. Reporters camped outside Sam's shuttered store, their cameras trained on the faded sign and the handwritten note someone had tacked to the door: "Justice for Martha." Across social media, the video of the slap played on loop, each view fueling debates about race, power, and accountability. Some called Sam a monster, others argued he was just a man pushed too far by a hard life. Martha didn't care for the noise. She had work to do. At noon, she met Daniel Harris, her lawyer, at a small diner 2 blocks from the shop. The place smelled of fried onions and coffee, its booths filled with locals who nodded at Martha with quiet respect. Harris slid into the seat across from her, his briefcase stuffed with papers. "Sam's been served the eviction notice," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "He's got 30 days to vacate. What do you want to do with the space?" Martha sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the window where kids played on the sidewalk. "I want it to be something good," she said. "Something for the neighborhood. Not another pawn shop or liquor store." Harris nodded, jotting notes. "A community center? A market? You've got options, Martha. That block's worth millions now." She smiled faintly. "It's not about the money, Daniel. Never was." Back in the 80s, when Martha bought the building, Bronzeville was a shadow of itself. Redlining had choked the neighborhood, leaving empty lots and crumbling storefronts. She'd been a nurse then, working double shifts while raising 2 kids alone after her husband, James, died in a factory accident. Every spare dollar went into buying property, first one building, then another, then the whole block. She'd faced skeptical bankers, shady developers, and neighbors who thought she was crazy. But Martha had a vision, a neighborhood that belonged to its people, not to outsiders looking to profit off its pain. Sam, meanwhile, was spiraling. He'd locked himself in his apartment above the store, the eviction notice crumpled on the floor. His phone buzzed with messages, some from friends offering sympathy, others from strangers calling him every name under the sun. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the walls, replaying the moment he'd raised his hand. He hadn't meant to hit her. Or maybe he had. The truth was blurry, tangled in years of frustration, bills piling up, customers arguing over change, the constant grind of keeping the store afloat. Martha's calm defiance had felt like a challenge, and he'd snapped. But now, the consequences were clear. He'd lost the store, his reputation, maybe his future. The police had questioned him for hours, and though they hadn't arrested him yet, the threat hung heavy. Worse, the neighborhood he'd served for 5 years now saw him as the enemy. He thought about his daughter, Lily, away at college. What would she think when she saw the video? The shame burned hotter than the anger ever had. By the 3rd day, the story had taken on a life of its own. A local activist group organized a rally outside the shop, demanding justice for Martha and an end to racial violence. Signs read, "Black Elders Matter," and "This is our home." Tasha, the young cashier, showed up, her eyes red from crying. She'd quit the day after the incident, unable to stomach working for Sam. Now, she held a megaphone, her voice shaking but strong. "Ms. Jones didn't deserve this," she said to the crowd. "She's one of us. She's always been one of us. Martha didn't attend the rally. She was at a community meeting in a church basement, listening to residents pitch ideas for the shop's future. A young mother suggested a daycare, an older man proposed a bookstore. A teenager, barely 16, raised his hand and said, "What about a place for kids to learn coding? So we can build something, not just survive." Martha's eyes lit up at that. She saw her younger self in that boy hungry for a chance, not a handout. That evening, she walked back to the block, her cane tapping lightly on the pavement. The rally had dispersed, but a few stragglers remained, taping flowers and notes to the shop's door. One caught her eye, a child's drawing of a smiling woman with silver braids, labeled Ms. Martha, our hero. She stood there for a long time, her throat tight, before tucking the drawing into her coat. The next week was chaos for Sam. His lawyer, a harried man with a cheap suit, told him the eviction was airtight. Martha's ownership was undisputed, her paperwork flawless. Sam could fight, but it would cost more than he had. "Cut your losses," the lawyer said. "Move on." But where? The store was his life. Without it, he was just another guy with debts and no plan. Desperate, Sam did something he hadn't done in years, he prayed. Not to any god in particular, just to something bigger than himself. He asked for a way out, a way to make things right. The answer came unexpectedly, in the form of a letter slipped under his door. It was from Martha, written in her neat, looping handwriting. "Mr. Carver," it began, "I don't forgive easy, but I don't hold grudges either. You've got one chance to make this right. Meet me at the diner, Thursday, 10 a.m. Sam read it a dozen times, his hands shaking. He didn't know what to expect: another confrontation, a lawsuit, or worse. But he went, driven by a mix of fear and something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Martha was already there when he arrived, sitting in the same booth, her tea steaming. She didn't stand, didn't smile, just gestured to the seat across from her. Sam sat, his throat dry, his palms sweaty. "Ms. Jones," he started, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry. I don't know what got into me." She studied him, her eyes sharp but not cruel. "You think sorry fixes it? You think it erases what you did in front of my people?" Sam flinched. "No, ma'am. I know it doesn't. I don't know how to make it right." Martha leaned forward, her voice low but steady. "You start by listening. Not to me, but to this neighborhood. You've been here 5 years, but you never saw us. You saw threats, not people. That's why you raised your hand." Sam's face burned, but he didn't argue. She was right. He'd spent years assuming the worst-off customers, of neighbors, of Martha. He'd let his father's old warnings about watching his back twist into something uglier. "I'm giving you a choice," Martha said. "You can leave, start over somewhere else. Or you can stay, but not as a shop owner. I'm turning that space into a community hub: classes, resources, a place for kids to grow. You can help build it. Not for me, but for them." Sam blinked, stunned. "Why would you trust me? After what I did?" "I don't," Martha said bluntly. "But I trust in second chances. My husband got one when he came back from Vietnam. My son got one when he got out of prison. I got one when I bought that block against all odds. You don't get a free pass, Sam. You earn it." The diner was quiet, the weight of her words settling between them. Sam thought about Lily, about the kind of man he wanted to be when she came home. He thought about the store, not as his kingdom, but as part of something bigger. "What do I have to do?" he asked. Martha didn't answer right away. She slid a piece of paper across the tablier list of tasks, from painting walls to organizing workshops. "Show up," she said. "Every day. And when you mess up, own it." Over the next month, the shop transformed. Volunteers gutted the old shelves, painted the walls a warm yellow, and installed computers donated by a local tech firm. Sam was there every day, hauling boxes, sweeping floors, his hands blistered but his heart lighter. The neighborhood watched, some with skepticism, others with cautious hope. Tasha returned, helping organize coding classes for kids. The teenager from the church meeting, Jamal, became the first student, his eyes bright with possibility. Martha oversaw it all, not as a boss but as a guide. She didn't flaunt her ownership, didn't need to. The block was her legacy, and now it was becoming the community's. On opening day, the hub buzzed with life, kids laughing, parents chatting, music spilling from a donated speaker. Sam stood in the corner, watching, a stranger in a place he'd once called his own. But when Jamal ran up, grinning, to show him a line of code, Sam felt something shift, a sense of purpose he'd never known in the store. Martha caught his eye from across the room and nodded, just once. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. The story of Martha and Sam spread far beyond Bronzeville, sparking conversations in homes, classrooms, and online forums. Was Sam's punishment enough, or too lenient? Did Martha's mercy show strength or weakness? And what did it mean for a community to heal when trust had been so brutally broken? Share your thoughts. Where do you stand on justice, redemption, and the conflicts that divide us?